The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital corridor as William sat beside Kate's bed, his hand wrapped firmly around hers. 3 days had passed since the surgery, and he hadn't left her side for more than a few minutes. The doctors said everything went well, but William couldn't shake the fear that had gripped his heart since they first received the diagnosis. Kate's face was pale against the white pillows, her breathing steady but shallow. The monitors beeped rhythmically, a sound that had become both comforting and terrifying to William over the past 72 hours. He studied every detail of her face, the way her eyelashes rested on her cheeks, the slight furrow in her brow even in sleep. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, a motion he'd repeated countless times since sitting down. The private room at the London clinic was quiet, almost too quiet. William had insisted on minimal staff, wanting to give Kate the privacy she deserved during this difficult time. The palace had released a brief statement about a planned abdominal surgery, nothing more. The world didn't need to know the fear that kept him awake at night, the conversations with doctors that made his blood run cold, the way his children had looked at him with worried eyes when he tried to explain why Mummy needed to stay in the hospital. A nurse came in to check Kate's vitals, moving efficiently around the equipment. She smiled softly at William, a mixture of sympathy and understanding in her eyes. She had seen him there every time she entered the room, always in the same position, always holding Kate's hand. The nurse had worked with many families over the years, but there was something about the way this man refused to let go of his wife that touched her deeply. After the nurse left, William leaned forward, resting his forehead gently against Kate's hand. He whispered words meant only for her, promises about the future, memories of their past, anything to fill the silence. He told her about George's football match that he'd missed, about Charlotte's drawing that now hung on the fridge at home, about Louis asking every morning when Mummy would come back. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, exhaustion and emotion taking their toll. The door opened again and William looked up to see his father, King Charles, entering the room. The king's face was etched with concern, his own health struggles making him particularly sensitive to what his son was going through. Charles approached quietly, placing a hand on William's shoulder. They didn't speak at first, just shared the heavy silence that comes when words feel inadequate. Charles had been visiting daily, sometimes staying for hours, other times just checking in briefly. He understood the weight William was carrying, not just as a husband but as the heir to the throne, as a father trying to shield his children from fear, as a man who had already lost one of the most important women in his life, far too young. The king saw echoes of his own past in his son's eyes, and it made his heart ache. William finally spoke, his voice hoarse from disuse. He talked about the children, about how he was trying to maintain normalcy for them while their world felt like it was spinning out of control. Charles listened, offering quiet reassurance when appropriate, but mostly just being present. Being there was sometimes the most important thing a father could do for his son. As Charles prepared to leave, promising to check on the children, he paused at the door. He looked back at William, still holding Kate's hand, still keeping his vigil. There was something both heartbreaking and beautiful about such devotion. The king left quietly, knowing that his son needed this time, needed to be the one constant in Kate's recovery. The afternoon dragged on with agonizing slowness. William watched the sunlight move across the floor, marking time in ways that felt both too fast and too slow. A tray of food arrived that he barely touched. His security team checked in periodically, their presence a reminder of the world outside this room, a world that kept turning even when his felt like it had stopped. Kate stirred slightly, and William's attention snapped back to her immediately. Her eyes remained closed, but her fingers twitched in his grip. He leaned closer, speaking her name softly, encouraging her to rest, to take all the time she needed. The doctors had warned him about the recovery process, about patience, about realistic expectations. But medical knowledge did nothing to ease the knot of anxiety in his chest. Evening approached, and William knew that soon he would need to leave, to go home to the children, to maintain the routine that provided them stability. But not yet. Not for a few more minutes. He couldn't bear the thought of Kate waking up alone, of her looking for him and finding an empty chair. So he stayed, his hand locked around hers, a silent promise that he would always be there when she needed him. The room grew dimmer as the sun set, casting everything in shades of gold and shadow. A staff member came in to adjust the lighting, turning on soft lamps that pushed back the darkness without being harsh. William thanked them quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile peace of the room. His phone buzzed several times with messages he didn't read. There would be time for that later, time for duty and responsibility and all the demands that came with his position. Right now he was simply a husband sitting beside his wife, hoping and praying for her recovery. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else could matter. His fingers remained intertwined with hers, holding on as if his grip alone could will her back to health, back to him, back to their life together. The night staff began their rounds, their footsteps soft in the hallway outside. William settled deeper into his chair, preparing for another long night. He wouldn't leave. He couldn't leave. Not while Kate still needed him there, even if she didn't know he was holding on. The next morning brought a commotion that shattered the peaceful bubble William had created around Kate's room. Voices echoed down the hallway, one in particular carrying with authority and barely contained frustration. William recognized that voice immediately, and his shoulders tensed. Camilla was coming, and from the sound of it, she had opinions about how things should be handled. The queen consort swept into the room with her characteristic energy, her expression a mixture of concern and something harder to define. She stopped short when she saw William, still in the same chair, still holding Kate's hand, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Because he hadn't, not really. Just brief moments of unconsciousness that couldn't be called rest. Always jerking awake at the slightest sound. Always checking to make sure Kate was still breathing steadily. Camilla's eyes swept over the scene, taking in the untouched breakfast tray, William's rumpled clothes, the desperate way he clung to his wife's hand. She opened her mouth to speak, then seemed to think better of it, moving to the other side of the bed instead. She looked down at Kate with genuine affection. Whatever complicated feelings existed in the family dynamics, Camilla had always respected Kate, had watched her navigate the pressures of royal life with grace and determination. For several minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were the medical equipment and the muted noise of the hospital beyond the closed door. William appreciated the silence, even as he felt the weight of Camilla's gaze on him. He knew what she was thinking because others had already said it. He needed rest. He needed to take care of himself. He needed to think about appearances and duties and all the other things that seemed so insignificant when the woman he loved was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Camilla finally broke the silence, her voice softer than her entrance had suggested. She asked about Kate's condition, about what the doctors were saying about the prognosis. William answered in short sentences, his voice rough with exhaustion. Yes, the surgery went well. Yes, she was stable. Yes, they expected her to wake fully in the next day or two. Each answer felt mechanical, like he was reading from a script rather than talking about his wife's health. The queen consort listened, nodding at appropriate moments, her hands folded in her lap. She had been through her own health scares, had sat beside Charles during his cancer treatments, understood the helpless feeling that came with watching someone you cared about suffer, but she also understood duty, the responsibilities that didn't pause for personal crisis, the way the world watched their every move and drew conclusions from each action. She began to speak about the children, about how they were managing, about the questions they were asking. George had stopped eating properly. Charlotte was having nightmares. Louis kept asking when things would go back to normal. William's jaw tightened as he listened. He knew all this. He called home multiple times a day. He felt the guilt of not being there for them as keenly as he felt the need to stay here with Kate. He was being pulled in two directions, and no choice felt right. Camilla's tone shifted slightly as she moved from updates about the children to suggestions about what William should do. Perhaps he should go home for a proper rest. Perhaps he should make an appearance to show the public that everything was under control. Perhaps he should think about what message he was sending by refusing to leave Kate's side. The words were wrapped in concern, but underneath was the steel of expectation, the unspoken reminder that he was not just a husband but a future king. William's grip on Kate's hand tightened imperceptibly. He had heard these suggestions before from well-meaning staff, from concerned friends, even from his father. Though Charles had been gentler about it, everyone seemed to think they knew what was best, what he should do, how he should act. But none of them understood the promise he had made to himself when they first got the diagnosis. He would not leave her. He would not let her face this alone. He had failed to protect his mother, had been too young, too far away when she needed someone. He would not fail Kate, too. He responded to Camilla with measured politeness, acknowledging her concerns while making it clear he wouldn't be swayed. The children were being well cared for. The palace was managing public relations. His father was handling urgent matters. Everything that could be delegated had been delegated. But this, being here with Kate, was something only he could do. It was something he needed to do, not just for her, but for himself, for the promises they had made to each other, for the life they had built together. Camilla's expression hardened slightly. She wasn't used to being dismissed, even gently. She leaned forward, her voice taking on a sharper edge. She spoke about duty, about the monarchy, about the thousands of people who depended on the royal family to be strong and present. She reminded him that Kate would understand, that Kate herself had always put duty first, that staying here like this was actually contrary to what Kate would want. The words hit William like physical blows, each one landing with precision in places he was already vulnerable, because Camilla wasn't entirely wrong. Kate did put duty first. Kate did understand the demands of their roles. But Kate was also the woman who had held him when nightmares about losing his mother woke him in the middle of the night. Kate was the one who understood his fears better than anyone, and he couldn't shake the conviction that if their positions were reversed, Kate would be right here holding his hand, refusing to leave no matter what anyone said. The tension in the room grew thicker. A nurse entered to check on Kate and immediately sensed the atmosphere, completing her tasks quickly and leaving without the usual small talk. Camilla continued to press her point, speaking about precedent, about what other royals had done in similar situations, about the importance of being seen as strong rather than vulnerable. Each argument was logical, each point valid in its own way, but none of them could penetrate the wall William had built around his decision. His exhaustion was making everything harder. The words seemed to come at him from a distance, filtered through layers of fatigue and emotion. He wanted to explain that this wasn't about stubbornness or ignoring duty. This was about being human first, about remembering that beneath all the titles and responsibilities, they were people who loved and feared and needed each other, but he couldn't find the words to express it, couldn't make her understand what this vigil meant to him. Kate's monitors beeped steadily, a reminder of why they were all there, of what really mattered. William looked down at her face, peaceful in sleep, unaware of the debate happening over her. He wondered what she would say if she could hear them. Would she tell him to go, to take care of their children and his duties? Or would she squeeze his hand and tell him she was glad he stayed? He thought he knew the answer, but doubt crept in, fed by Camilla's persistent arguments. The morning stretched on, filled with increasingly tense conversation. Camilla wasn't being cruel, William knew that. She genuinely believed she was helping, that she was protecting him from himself, from decisions made in emotional distress that he might regret later. But her inability to understand why he needed to stay, her focus on duty over emotion, created a chasm between them that felt impossible to bridge in this moment. Finally, Camilla stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced precision. She had said her piece, made her arguments, and clearly wasn't getting through. Her expression was a mixture of frustration and resignation. As she moved toward the door, she paused, looking back at William with something that might have been sympathy or might have been pity. She spoke once more, her voice carrying a weight of finality, a statement that would change everything. Camilla's voice cut through the room like ice, each word deliberate and sharp. She said that clinging to Kate like this wasn't love, it was fear. Fear of losing someone else, fear of being the boy who couldn't save his mother all over again. She said he was making Kate's illness about himself, about his own trauma, rather than about what was actually best for everyone involved. The words hung in the air, brutal in their honesty, devastating in their accuracy. William's face went pale, then flushed with anger. His hand remained locked around Kate's, but everything else about him had gone rigid. No one had dared to speak so directly about his mother's death in relation to his current behavior. It was the unspoken understanding that everyone danced around, the wound that never fully healed, the reason behind so many of his protective instincts. And Camilla had just ripped off that carefully maintained bandage with clinical precision. She continued, her voice never rising but carrying a weight that made each sentence land with force. She spoke about how the children needed their father present, not a ghost haunting a hospital room. She talked about how the monarchy needed its future king to show strength, not this raw vulnerability that made people uncomfortable. She said that Kate, when she woke up, would be horrified to see what he had done to himself, how he had neglected everything else to maintain this vigil that helped no one, least of all Kate herself. The words were harsh, harsher than anything Camilla had said to him before, but they came from a place of frustration, born from watching him destroy himself, from seeing the monarchy she had worked so hard to support starting to show cracks because one man couldn't let go of his wife's hand. She had tried gentle persuasion, had tried logical arguments, had tried appealing to his sense of duty. Nothing had worked. So now she wielded the truth like a weapon, hoping that pain might accomplish what kindness could not. William stood slowly, carefully releasing Kate's hand for the first time in hours. His legs were unsteady from sitting so long, but his voice was controlled when he finally spoke. He told Camilla that she was right about one thing. He was afraid. He was terrified. He was haunted by the memory of his mother dying alone, surrounded by strangers with no one who truly loved her there to hold her hand in those final moments. He said he knew Kate wasn't dying, that the doctors were optimistic that everything pointed to a full recovery. But knowing something intellectually didn't make the fear go away. He spoke about the night they got the diagnosis, about how Kate had been so calm, so brave, so focused on making sure everyone else was okay. She had comforted him when he should have been comforting her. She had planned everything out, talked to the children in age-appropriate ways, made arrangements for their care, organized her schedule to minimize disruption. She had done everything right, been everything strong, and all he could do was hold her hand and promise he wouldn't leave her to face this alone. Camilla listened, her expression unreadable. She had made her point, delivered her harsh truths, and now she was hearing his. The room felt charged with emotion, years of unspoken tension suddenly given voice. This wasn't just about Kate's hospitalization. It was about grief and duty, about personal needs and public expectations, about a family trying to navigate impossible situations while the world watched and judged every move. William's voice grew stronger as he spoke. He acknowledged that his decision affected others, that the children needed him, that his duties were being neglected, but he also said that sometimes being a good father meant showing his children that love was more important than duty, that when someone you loved was hurting, you stayed with them regardless of what others expected. He wanted George, Charlotte, and Louis to grow up knowing that family came first, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that being present for the people you loved was the highest form of strength. The argument was sound, the emotion behind it genuine, but Camilla wasn't backing down. She countered that teaching children to prioritize personal feelings over responsibility was setting them up for failure in the roles they were born to fulfill. The monarchy survived because people put duty above personal desire. If everyone did what William was doing, chose individual needs over collective responsibility, the institution would crumble. His mother had understood that, even if it had cost her personally. Kate understood it too. The mention of his mother in comparison to his situation ignited something in William. His composure cracked and anger flooded through. He said that his mother had been destroyed by duty, by the relentless demands of a role that gave her no room to breathe, no space to be human. She had followed all the rules, met all the expectations, and it had killed her just as surely as the car crash. He refused to let duty consume Kate the same way. He refused to teach his children that love was less important than appearances. Camilla stepped closer, her own anger now visible. She spoke about how she had been demonized for years, called names, blamed for things that weren't her fault, all because she had dared to love Charles. She talked about the sacrifices she had made, the public hatred she had endured, the way she had slowly, painfully earned her place in this family and in public opinion. She had done it all by understanding that personal happiness had to be balanced against public duty, that being part of the royal family meant accepting limitations that others didn't face. She said that William's current behavior, this refusal to let go of Kate's hand, was creating exactly the kind of story the press loved. A prince too emotional to fulfill his duties, a future king who put personal feelings above the nation. Headlines were already forming, narratives being crafted about weakness and instability. Every hour he stayed glued to that chair was another piece of ammunition for people who questioned whether the monarchy should continue. Did he want his children to inherit a crown that had been weakened by his inability to separate personal crisis from public responsibility? The words stung because they touched on William's deepest fears about his role, about his ability to be the king his grandmother had been, about whether he could protect both his family and the institution. Camilla knew exactly where to strike, had learned through years of navigating royal politics how to identify vulnerabilities and exploit them when necessary. She wasn't being cruel for cruelty's sake. She was trying to save him from himself, trying to protect the monarchy she had worked so hard to support. William returned to his chair, sitting heavily, his hand immediately finding Kate's again. The familiar warmth of her skin against his was grounding, a reminder of why he was here, why he couldn't leave despite all the logical arguments against staying. He looked up at Camilla, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and emotion. He said quietly that maybe she was right about everything. Maybe he was being selfish. Maybe he was damaging the monarchy. Maybe his children would suffer from his absence. But he couldn't leave. He physically could not make himself walk out that door while Kate was still unconscious. Camilla's expression softened slightly, seeing the genuine anguish in his face. But she didn't relent. She told him that being an adult, being a leader, meant doing things you didn't want to do. It meant making choices that hurt. It meant putting others before yourself even when every instinct screamed to do the opposite. Charles had done it. The late Queen had done it. Kate herself had done it countless times. William needed to do it now. The silence that followed was broken only by the medical equipment, mechanical sounds in a very human moment. Two people who cared about each other, about the institution they served, about the woman lying unconscious between them, had reached an impasse. Neither was entirely wrong. Neither was entirely right. They were just two individuals trying to navigate an impossible situation with no clear answer, no perfect solution, no way forward that didn't involve sacrifice and pain. Camilla moved toward the door one final time, her shoulders set with determination. She had said everything she came to say, delivered every harsh truth she thought William needed to hear. Whether he listened or not was now up to him. As her hand touched the door handle, she delivered one last statement, the harshest words yet, the ones that would echo in William's mind long after she left the room and force him to confront truths he had been avoiding. Camilla's final words before leaving were simple but devastating. She said that Kate would be ashamed of him when she woke up and learned what he had sacrificed to maintain this vigil. That Kate, who had always balanced love and duty so perfectly, would see his behavior not as devotion, but as a failure to trust her strength, to honor the partnership they had built on mutual respect and shared responsibility. Then she was gone, the door closing with a soft click that felt like thunder in the sudden silence. William sat frozen, those words circling in his mind like vultures. Would Kate be ashamed? Would she see this as devotion or as him falling apart when she needed him to be strong? He looked down at her peaceful face, searching for answers she couldn't give while unconscious. His thumb continued its automatic circle on her hand, a motion that had become as natural as breathing over the past few days. The afternoon sun moved across the floor, marking time in golden squares. William's mind wouldn't stop replaying the conversation, examining each of Camilla's points, finding uncomfortable truths in many of them. His children did need him. George had a school presentation coming up that he'd been nervous about. Charlotte had been asking for help with her piano practice. Louis simply wanted his father home for bedtime stories. These small, precious moments of their childhood were slipping away while he sat in this chair. A text message from his father appeared on his phone. Camilla told me about your conversation. I'm here if you need to talk. The children miss you. So do I. The message was gentle, without pressure, but it added another weight to the ones William was already carrying. He typed a brief response promising to call later, then set the phone aside, his hand returning immediately to Kate's. He thought about his mother, about the comparisons Camilla had drawn. Diana had died when he was 15, too young to fully understand the complexities of her life, old enough to feel the devastating loss. For years he had carried guilt about not being there, about being at Balmoral when she was in Paris, about the phone call he had cut short because he wanted to get back to playing with his brother. Rational thought told him that nothing he could have done would have changed that night. Emotion told him he had failed her. Was he trying to rewrite that failure through Kate? The thought was uncomfortable, sitting in his chest like a stone. He loved Kate for who she was, not as a replacement for his mother or a chance to correct past regrets. But Camilla's words had planted seeds of doubt. Was his vigil really about Kate's needs? Or was it about his own inability to process trauma, to trust that sometimes love meant letting go and having faith that the person would still be there when you came back? Kate stirred slightly, and William's attention snapped back to her completely. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Her fingers twitched in his grip. He leaned forward, speaking softly, telling her he was there, that she was safe, that everything would be okay. The medical team had said these small movements were good signs, indicators that she was progressing well, that full consciousness was approaching. Each flutter of awareness made his heart leap with hope and dread in equal measure. The evening nurse came in for the shift change, a different woman than the morning staff. She introduced herself quietly, reviewed Kate's charts, and checked all the equipment with practiced efficiency. She had kind eyes that had seen many families in crisis. As she prepared to leave, she paused and spoke to William directly. She said that in 30 years of nursing, she had seen many devoted partners, but few who held on quite as tightly as he did. She asked gently if he had eaten anything that day, if he had slept at all, if there was someone who could relieve him even for an hour. William assured her he was fine, the same lie he had been telling everyone for days. The nurse didn't push, but her expression made it clear she didn't believe him. She mentioned that taking care of himself wasn't selfish. It was necessary if he wanted to be strong for Kate when she fully woke up. Then she left him alone with his thoughts and his sleeping wife, and the growing realization that he couldn't continue like this indefinitely. His phone buzzed with a video call from home. His mother-in-law, Carol Middleton, was trying to reach him. He answered, and suddenly there were his children on screen, 3 beautiful faces looking at him with a mixture of relief and sadness. George tried to be brave, reporting on his day with forced cheerfulness. Charlotte asked when Mummy would be better, her voice small and uncertain. Louis simply said he missed Daddy and wanted him to come home. The call lasted only a few minutes, but it shattered what remained of William's conviction that he was making the right choice. After they disconnected, William put his head in his free hand, exhaustion and emotion overwhelming his usual composure. His children needed him. Not tomorrow or next week, but now, today, in these small daily moments that built the foundation of childhood security. Kate would want him with them. Kate would insist on it, would probably be furious if she knew he was neglecting their children to maintain a vigil she never asked for. But the thought of leaving, of walking out that door and not being here if something happened, if Kate woke up and reached for him and found only emptiness, was physically painful. He felt trapped between impossible choices, damned if he stayed and damned if he left. Camilla's harsh words echoed in his mind, mixing with his own doubts, creating a storm of uncertainty where there had been conviction just hours before. A doctor came in to check on Kate's progress, a senior consultant who had been overseeing her care. He reviewed her charts, examined her responses, and pronounced himself satisfied with her recovery trajectory. He expected her to wake fully within the next 12 to 24 hours. Her body was healing well from the surgery. Everything pointed to a complete recovery. The doctor's words should have been reassuring, but they only made William's decision harder. If Kate was going to wake soon, shouldn't he be here for that moment? But if she was recovering well, didn't that mean he could safely leave, that his presence wasn't medically necessary, that he was choosing his own emotional needs over his children's actual needs? The doctor seemed to sense William's internal struggle. He spoke carefully about recovery patterns, about how patients often woke gradually, drifting in and out of awareness before achieving full consciousness. He mentioned that family presence was beneficial but not critical at every single moment. Patients did just as well with loved ones taking shifts, ensuring someone was always fresh and able to provide support. The words were kind but contained an implicit message. William's constant presence wasn't helping Kate as much as he believed it was. After the doctor left, William sat in the deepening twilight, the room lit only by the soft glow of medical equipment and the last rays of sunset through the window. He thought about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, and how she had balanced personal grief with public duty throughout her long reign. When Philip died, she had mourned privately, but continued with her responsibilities, understanding that the institution required her presence even when her heart was breaking. She had taught him about duty through example, about the sacrifices required of those who served. But his grandmother had also been human, had loved deeply, had made choices that prioritized family when it truly mattered. She had understood nuance, had known that duty without humanity was just empty ritual. What would she advise him now? William thought she might say that both staying and leaving could be the right choice, depending on which served love better. And perhaps that was the real question. Did his vigil serve Kate's recovery and their family's well-being, or did it serve only his own fear? Kate's hand was warm in his, her pulse steady beneath his fingers. He studied her face in the fading light, memorizing details he already knew by heart. The small scar on her forehead from a childhood accident, the way her nose wrinkled slightly when she was deep in sleep, the strength visible even in repose, the quiet determination that had made her such an excellent partner in both their personal life and their public roles. She was strong enough to recover without him holding her hand every second. She had always been strong enough. Maybe it was time he trusted that strength instead of trying to protect her from everything. His phone buzzed again, another message from his father. The children had nightmares tonight. George is asking for you. Charlotte won't stop crying. Your presence is needed here, William. Kate will understand. She would insist on it. The words were gentle but firm, a reminder of responsibilities waiting beyond this room, of other people who needed him, of the balance he had sworn to maintain when he took on the role of husband and father within the constraints of royal duty. William closed his eyes, exhaustion making everything feel distant and surreal. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would reassess, would make a decision based on what was truly best for everyone rather than what his fear demanded. Tonight he would stay with Kate, but tomorrow, when morning light returned and brought clarity with it, he would have to choose between the vigil that felt necessary and the duties that actually were. Camilla's harsh words had accomplished what gentler persuasion could not. They had forced him to question everything he thought he knew about love and duty, and what it meant to truly be there for the people who depended on him. Morning arrived with a change that William felt before he fully understood. Kate's hand tightened around his, not the unconscious twitches of the past few days, but a deliberate squeeze, purposeful and aware. His eyes flew open from the light doze he had fallen into, his entire body suddenly alert. He leaned forward, searching her face for signs of consciousness, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Kate's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Her gaze was unfocused at first, confused by the bright hospital lights and unfamiliar surroundings. She blinked several times, her eyes gradually clearing, and then she saw him. Recognition flooded her face, followed immediately by concern. Her voice was hoarse from days of intubation and disuse, barely above a whisper, but the first word she spoke was his name, formed as a question, as if she couldn't quite believe he was really there. William's response caught in his throat, emotion overwhelming his ability to speak. He managed to tell her she was okay, that the surgery went well, that she was in the hospital recovering. His free hand came up to touch her face gently, needing to confirm she was really awake, really looking at him with those familiar eyes that had seen him through so many moments, both wonderful and terrible. Relief flooded through him with such intensity that he felt dizzy, all the fear of the past days releasing at once. Kate tried to sit up, wincing at the pain from her surgical incisions. William immediately moved to help her, adjusting pillows, raising the bed carefully, his hands gentle despite their trembling. She touched his face, her fingers tracing the dark circles under his eyes, the several days of stubble, the exhaustion etched into every line. She asked how long she had been unconscious, her medical training as a longtime student of health matters making her curious about her own recovery timeline. When William told her it had been nearly 4 days, her eyes widened. She looked around the room, noticing details. The chair pulled close to the bed, positioned as if someone had been sitting there for extended periods. The untouched meal trays stacked on a side table. His rumpled clothes, clearly worn for more than 1 day. Her expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something close to dismay. She asked, her voice still rough but growing stronger, whether he had been there the entire time. William couldn't lie to her, had never been able to lie to Kate successfully. He admitted that yes, he had stayed, had held her hand through the worst of it, had needed to be there to make sure she was okay. He expected her to understand, to appreciate his devotion, to be touched by his refusal to leave her side. Instead, her face showed something he hadn't anticipated. A mixture of love and frustration that he recognized from other times when his protective instincts had overridden his practical judgment. Kate's first question wasn't about her health or her recovery. She asked about the children. Where were they? Who was with them? Were they scared? Had William been there for them during this time? Each question landed like an arrow, striking at the exact concerns that had been building in William's mind since Camilla's visit. He explained that the children were at home with their grandparents, that they were being well cared for, that he called them multiple times daily. But even as he said it, he heard the inadequacy of his answers, saw in Kate's eyes that phone calls weren't the same as presence. She asked about his duties, about the schedule that had been carefully planned months in advance, about meetings and appearances and the responsibilities that didn't pause for personal crisis. William admitted that everything had been postponed or delegated, that his father was covering what needed to be covered, that the palace was managing public relations. Kate's expression grew more troubled with each admission. She knew better than anyone the delicate balance required to maintain public trust, the way absence created speculation and concern. Kate tried to speak gently, her hand still holding his butt with less pressure now, as if she was already preparing to let go. She told him that she understood why he stayed, that she knew about his fears regarding his mother, that she appreciated his love and devotion, but she also said that staying with her while neglecting their children wasn't what she wanted, wasn't what they had agreed their marriage and their roles would be about. They had always promised to balance personal needs with public duty, to show their children that both love and responsibility mattered. The words hurt more coming from Kate than they had from Camilla, because Kate spoke with intimate knowledge of William's heart, with the authority of someone who had earned the right to challenge him through years of partnership and support. She wasn't being cruel or political. She was being honest about what kind of family they wanted to build, what kind of example they wanted to set, what kind of life they had committed to when they chose to marry into the roles they occupied. William tried to explain his fear, his need to be there, his promise to himself that he wouldn't let her face this alone. Kate listened, her eyes never leaving his face, but when he finished, she spoke with quiet certainty. She said that she hadn't been alone, that she had known on some level that he was there, that his presence had been a comfort, but she also said that their children were alone without both parents present, that they needed him more than she did right now, that the greatest gift he could give her was to take care of their family while she recovered. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed too bright, too cheerful for the conversation they were having. A nurse came in to check on Kate, exclaiming with delight at finding her patient awake and alert. She called for the doctor, and suddenly the room filled with medical professionals all wanting to assess Kate's condition, to verify that her recovery was progressing as expected. William was gently pushed aside, no longer the central figure now that Kate could advocate for herself. He stood near the window, watching the medical team work, seeing Kate respond to their questions with her usual grace and intelligence despite the pain and weakness. She was handling this with strength, just as she handled everything, and Camilla's words echoed in his mind. Kate would be ashamed of him for not trusting that strength. Not ashamed exactly, Kate wasn't harsh like that, but disappointed perhaps that he had let fear override judgment, that he had needed her to wake up and tell him what he should have known all along. The medical team finished their examination and left, pronouncing themselves very pleased with Kate's progress. They expected her to make a full recovery, though it would take time and rest. Visitors would be allowed, but only for short periods. She would likely remain in the hospital for another week at least, possibly longer depending on how her body responded to mobilization and therapy. The doctor's words confirmed what William had been avoiding acknowledging. This was going to be a long recovery, and he couldn't maintain a bedside vigil for weeks or months without serious consequences for everyone else who depended on him. When they were alone again, Kate reached for his hand, pulling him back to the chair beside her bed. She spoke about their life together, about the promises they had made, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. She reminded him of conversations they'd had late at night, planning how they would balance royal duty with raising grounded, loved children. They had agreed that being present mattered more than being perfect, that their children needed to see them as human and fallible but committed and caring. How could they teach those values if William disappeared every time crisis struck? If he couldn't trust others to help carry the burden? She talked about her own fears during the time leading up to the surgery. Fears she hadn't shared with him because she needed to be strong for their children, for her family, for the public who looked to her for stability. She had been terrified, not just of the surgery itself, but of leaving their children without a mother, of William having to face that loss again after what he had been through with Diana. But she had gone forward with courage, trusting the medical team, trusting that whatever happened, their family would survive because they had built something strong enough to weather storms. William listened, really listened, hearing not just her words but the underlying truth. They were stronger together, but that strength came from trust and balance, not from clinging to each other in fear. Kate was showing him, even from a hospital bed hours after waking from major surgery, what real courage looked like. It wasn't refusing to leave someone's side. It was having faith that love persisted even across physical distance, that being there for someone sometimes meant being somewhere else doing what needed to be done. He told her about Camilla's visit, about the harsh words that had shaken his conviction, about his father's gentle messages, about seeing the children's faces on the video call and realizing how much they needed him. Kate listened without interrupting, her thumb now tracing circles on his hand the way his had on hers for days. When he finished, she smiled softly, that smile that had first captured his heart years ago, full of understanding and love and gentle challenge to be his best self. Kate said that Camilla had been right about some things, even if her delivery had been harsh. The monarchy did require sacrifices, did demand a balance between personal desires and public duty. But Camilla was also wrong about one crucial thing. Showing vulnerability wasn't weakness, and teaching their children that love. The afternoon passed in a different rhythm than the previous days. William still held Kate's hand, but now it was a connection between two conscious people, rather than a desperate lifeline to someone lost in unconsciousness. They talked about small things and large things, about the children's recent activities and future plans, about Kate's recovery timeline and what support she would need when she came home. The conversations were normal, almost mundane, and that normalcy was healing in ways that vigil-keeping had never been. Kate dozed off periodically, her body still recovering from the trauma of surgery. Each time she woke, she seemed surprised to find William still there, and each time he reassured her that he would stay a few more hours before going home to the children. She didn't push him to leave immediately, understanding that he needed this transition time, needed to see her awake and alert enough times to trust that she would still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days following. The king visited in the late afternoon, his relief at seeing Kate awake evident in his face. He embraced his daughter-in-law carefully, mindful of her surgical wounds, and spoke quietly with her about her recovery. Then he turned to William, and father and son shared a look that communicated volumes without words. Charles understood what this decision was costing William, understood the courage it took to choose balance over fear. He promised to visit Kate daily, to ensure she was never alone for long, to be there in William's place when duties kept him away. Camilla came with Charles, hanging back at first, uncertain of her reception after the harsh words she had spoken. But Kate, with characteristic grace, called her forward and thanked her for being honest with William when gentler approaches had failed. She acknowledged that Camilla's words had been hard to hear, probably hard to say, but ultimately necessary. The queen consort's face showed relief mixed with something like remorse. She hadn't enjoyed being cruel, had done it only because she saw no other way to break through William's fear-driven determination. The children called on video again in the early evening, this time with Kate able to speak to them. Their joy at hearing Mummy's voice, at seeing her smile despite the hospital background, was infectious. George asked detailed questions about her surgery, his curious mind wanting to understand the medical aspects. Charlotte just wanted to know when Mummy would come home. Louis blew kisses at the screen and made her laugh, which hurt her incision but was worth it for the pure happiness of the sound. When William told them he would be home for bedtime, their excitement was audible even through the phone speakers. After the call ended, Kate looked at William with eyes full of love and conviction. She told him it was time, that he had stayed long enough, that she would be fine with the nurses and the security team and the family members who would visit. She reminded him that she was strong, that she had always been strong, that part of loving someone was trusting them to be okay without you hovering constantly. The words were gentle but firm, a loving push toward the door he had been unable to walk through for 4 days. William stood slowly, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from too much sitting. He gathered his things, moving with deliberate slowness, each action a small step toward separation. He returned to Kate's bedside one final time, leaning down to kiss her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips in a gentle touch that conveyed everything he couldn't put into words. She reached up to touch his face, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite his best efforts at composure. She made him promise to take care of himself, to sleep in an actual bed, to eat proper meals, to be present with the children rather than just physically there while mentally still at the hospital. She made him promise to let others help, to delegate when necessary, to remember that being a good husband and father didn't mean doing everything himself. He promised it all, meaning every word, even as part of him screamed to stay, to pull that chair back to the bedside and refuse to leave. The walk to the door felt like miles instead of steps. William paused with his hand on the handle, looking back at Kate one more time. She smiled at him, that brilliant smile that had lit up his life since the day they met, and told him she loved him, that she was proud of him for making the hard choice, that she would see him tomorrow. He told her he loved her too, that he would call before the children's bedtime so they could say goodnight together, that he would be back first thing in the morning. Then he opened the door and stepped into the hallway, letting it close behind him with a soft click. He stood there for a moment, disoriented by the sudden separation, fighting every instinct to turn around and go back. His security team materialized around him, giving him space but ready to move when he was. Other hospital staff passed by, some recognizing him, others too focused on their own duties to notice. The world had continued turning while he sat in that room, and now he was rejoining it. The drive home felt surreal. William watched London pass by the car windows, the familiar streets and landmarks seeming somehow different after his days inside the hospital. The city was preparing for evening, people heading home from work, tourists taking photos, life flowing along its normal patterns. His children were part of that normal life now, waiting for him, needing him to be their anchor while their mother recovered. Arriving at Kensington Palace, he was greeted by staff who seemed relieved to see him. The children were having dinner, but they abandoned their meals the moment they heard he was home, racing toward him with shrieks of delight. He knelt down and gathered all three into his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of them, feeling their small bodies pressed against his, solid and real and needing him in ways Kate didn't right now. George pulled back first, studying his father's face with those two perceptive eyes. He asked if Daddy was okay, if Mummy was really going to be fine, if things could go back to normal now. William assured him that yes, Mummy was recovering well, and yes, things would gradually return to normal, though it would take some time. Charlotte wanted to know when they could visit, wanted to make Mummy drawings and cards to brighten her hospital room. Louis simply held on to William's hand and wouldn't let go, his small fingers wrapped tightly around his father's larger ones. They finished dinner together, William sitting with them and actually eating for the first time in days. The food tasted like sawdust in his mouth, his appetite still suppressed by worry and exhaustion. But he ate anyway because Kate had made him promise to take care of himself. After dinner, they moved to the living room where the children showed him everything he had missed. George's completed school project, Charlotte's piano progress, Louis's new favorite toy. He gave each moment his full attention, trying to be truly present rather than letting his mind drift back to the hospital room. Bath time was chaotic and wonderful, full of splashing and laughter and the simple joy of routine. William helped each child in turn, listening to their chatter, answering their questions, providing the steady presence they had been missing. Then came stories and tucking in, that sacred bedtime ritual that he had neglected for days. He sat with each child, reading favorite books, talking about their day, providing comfort and security. When Charlotte asked if he would be there when she woke up, he promised that yes, he would be there for breakfast, and yes, he would take her to school. Louis fell asleep first, his breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood slumber. William sat beside his youngest son's bed for a few extra minutes, watching him sleep, marveling at the innocence and trust visible in his relaxed features. Charlotte took longer, fighting sleep because she didn't want Daddy to leave, but eventually her eyes closed and her grip on his hand loosened. George was the last, wanting to talk about Mummy's surgery, about the recovery process, about the science of healing. William answered his questions as best he could, grateful for George's analytical mind that helped make sense of scary situations. Finally, all 3 children were asleep, and William made his way to his own bedroom. The space felt simultaneously familiar and foreign after his days in the hospital. He called Kate as promised, keeping his voice quiet so as not to disturb the children down the hall. She sounded tired but good, reported that she had eaten dinner and was resting comfortably. They talked for only a few minutes before Kate insisted he go to sleep, that he needed rest as much as she did. After hanging up, William stood by the window, looking out at the darkened gardens. He thought about the past 4 days, about Camilla's harsh words that had ultimately been necessary, about Kate's gentle insistence that he trust her strength, about his children's need for his presence. He had learned something important about love during this crisis. It wasn't just about holding on. Sometimes it was about having the courage to let go, to trust that the people you loved would still be there even when you weren't holding their hand. His phone buzzed with a text from Kate. "Thank you for coming home. The children needed you. I love you always, even across distance." William smiled, typing back a brief response before finally allowing himself to prepare for bed. He showered for the first time in days, feeling the hot water wash away not just physical grime but some of the emotional weight he had been carrying. He climbed into bed, his body sinking into the mattress with relief. And for the first time here,